Cheers, guys. Epyx911, welcome to the Elitist Gamer. Today's show, I'm going to talk about my favorite computer of all, my Commodore 64. And no ambitions of singing, guys, trust me. Loud and fucking clear. I knows I can't sing. The Commodore 64 was released in the early 1980s, and it was the successor to the Commodore VIC-20. Now, I had a friend who had a Commodore VIC-20, and we used to spend hours typing in programs from Compute's Gazette into his Commodore VIC-20, only to most of the time not have them run. Now, the way this worked back then is you would enter a line of code from the book, and each part of the code had a checksum that had to match. Now, I wasn't a 10-finger typist, he sure as fuck wasn't a 10-finger typist, so we basically, it took fucking ages, alright? It took like the better part of a day just to put the program in, and when you did get the program to run, it amounted to nothing more than usually a Pong-style variant or breakout paddle type game. Basically, super fucking primitive. Super primitive. I also used to go to a store in our shopping mall called Minitronics, and Minitronics was a store that had Apples, it had Commodores, and it had Ataris, and I remember spending hours there. It was an awesome woman who I wish I could find to this day. So this is about 1981, and so it would have been Commodore VIC-20 and pets at that time. But anyway, she had the patience of a fucking saint. Because I swear, if I had been born in this generation, I would have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, ADD, half a dozen other fucking things, and probably put on Ritalin. And I was a hyper kid. I acted out. I didn't have much respect for authority. Basically, I was a mouthy little fuck. But Joanne, she took the patience. She took the patience of a saint literally to heart, and she had infinite patience for us little fucking rugrats. She called us her gophers. She'd let us grab her a coffee from the food court in the shopping mall, and more often than not, we were allowed to keep the change. So if a coffee cost, 40, 50 cents at that time, she'd give us $1, and we could keep the change. Keep in mind, every quarter was a sacred artifact because it allowed you to play the arcade games. So the other part of the equation for grabbing her food and stuff and helping customers by showcasing games, because she wasn't a gamer, was we got to play games. And for any of you who grew up with Sears stores, they had Commodore computers. In fact, we went to play the games there, we went to trade pirated wares there. This was later in the 80s, and of course, who hasn't, as a kid, my age, in a computer store, typed the famous basic lines, 10, print, you are a fuckface, 20, go to 10, hit enter, and run the fuck out of the store. Because we all did it. And multiple times, to the point where I'm pretty sure I was barred from a couple of stores. But back to Joanne and Minitronics. Joanne let us play the games there. So I played Atari 2600, we played in television, Atari, you name it. It was our place to hang out after school, weekends, summer holidays, and we pretty much just vegetated there. That is where I fell in love with computers. And in 1982, when the Commodore 64 was released, and that commercial that I did a god-awful job of doing a rendition of was one of many fucking marketing commercials that Commodore put out in the early 80s when they could actually fucking market themselves out of a cardboard box, unlike what was to come later. But that's a whole other video. So I lusted after the Commodore 64. Fuck, did I want one bad. I had a paper route when I was 11 years old, delivering a provincial newspaper here in British Columbia called The Columbian, and I saved. Then I got another paper route when the Columbian went out of business for the province, and I saved for another 3 years until I could finally buy my very own Commodore 64 with a disk drive. Fuck me, do I remember taking that thing home. I had no games yet. I had one cartridge game that they threw in because I bought the disk drive as well, and that was Gateway to Apshai from a company called Epyx, which is where I get my nickname from. Holy fuck, did I love the fuck out of that game. I played that game night and day. Breathed, ate, slept Gateway to Apshai. It was kind of like an action-y roguelike with less items and spells and less of pretty much everything. Primitive graphics, but it had graphics. It wasn't ASCII, but it was fun as all shit. And I think that first weekend, my buddy came over, and it was sad because I had my own TV, but it was actually a black and white TV. It was a TV that was manufactured probably sometime in the fucking 1960s, I don't know, but mid-80s, that was what I played my Commodore 64 games on, so it didn't matter that it was a 16-color machine. I had shades of gray. That's how I played, but I didn't care because that fucker was mine. I bought a shoebox full of blanks, hole punched those motherfuckers to make them double-sided. And the first Saturday that I could, my buddy Chris was over and we copied. We daisy-chained our Commodore 1541 disk drives and copied. Let me tell you, those were some fucking awesome times. And for any of you out there that remember that, how fucking nostalgic, was that? That's how we did our pirating of games back then. It wasn't downloads, it wasn't some informal, boring-ass torrent. It was a social thing. You got together with your buddies, you had your blank discs, you had beers and junk food or pop, played games on one of the 64s while the other one with the two 1541s was copying games. Now, we got pretty lucky here in North America because I know in the UK, for any UK viewers that are watching, most of you got shafted because A, the 1541 was way too fucking expensive, and B, you basically had to make do with tape drives. Press play to play, basically, on tape. And that was painful. Now, keep in mind, for any of you who don't know the Commodore 64, games took a shit long time to load. Like, I'm talking, you could start loading some games like Bard's Tale from Interplay and Electronic Arts, hit the load command, have dinner with your family, grab some dessert, come back down, and if you were lucky, you got to swap the first disc for the second one. It took long, but it was all worth it because you could cram a lot of games onto a disc. Copying of games was way easy, and it was fun times all around. And if you didn't live through that, you know what, you're going to have the same kind of nostalgic memories from the time you did grow up in. Because suddenly everything was at my fingertips. And you got to remember, this was pre-internet, right? So pre-internet, you didn't have all the avenues. So you depended on your buddies, friends, to get those games. And my buddy Chris, he would do downloads on his modem. And Christ, I said, loading a disc game took a fuck of a long time. You hadn't seen anything yet. Downloading games on the primitive modem, analog modem, and BBS days was a complete clusterfuck exercise in patience. 60 to 70K games could take 4 or 5 hours to download. Hours! We're talking bits per minute download rates. 300 baud modem, 150 baud modem. And you would just pray as you're going to your computer in the morning to see if it finished, that it finished successfully. Because if it didn't, and you fucking pooched it, you had to do that shit all over again. So, suffice it to say, we were generally getting our games from copying and not downloading. A, the long distance, our parents would have fucking killed us, and we did do a few, and they did kill us. But B, it was just, you had access to so much more meeting people in person, copying games, getting together, and just having fun, like the good old pen and paper role-playing games. It was a fucking blast. And as far as peripherals go, we had what was called the Wicco joystick in my group of friends. And for anybody, I'm going to put a link down here just so you can see. In fact, you know what? I'll throw a picture up here so you can see what the Wicco looks like. But the Wicco command control joystick was almost arcade perfect in how it felt. Of course, it had one button on the top of the red ball, and it had a regular one button, because most Commodore 64 games were one button. There were a few that weren't, and you learn to kind of get around that. One of the tricks we did, I think it was Kung Fu Master. You know, you've got, I think the button was the punch, and to kick you'd need spacebar. So what a lot of us did is we sat on the couch, put the Commodore 64 on the floor, get your right big toe on that spacebar, and play the game. So you were using the button from the joystick to punch, and your toe and spacebar to kick. Good times. Fucking good times. I'm going to wrap up the first episode of my multi-part Commodore 64 show. I'm going to talk about games, the hardware, the mighty SID chip, peripherals that actually made that loading bearable, and a shit ton of other stuff. So for any of you Commodore 64 fans out there that still enjoy your Commodore 64, I think you're going to love this series. For any of you out there that aren't computer buffs that lived through that period, I've got plenty of other videos. This will probably put you to fucking sleep. But for the rest of you, you were in for a hell of a nostalgic ride. Enjoy the journey with me. As always, till part 2, cheers guys.